Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today, Patrick Sullivan, Chief Technology Officer of Security Strategy at Akamai. Patrick, MIT reports an internet increase of 25% from January to March. Akamai researchers combed through 2 trillion DNS records and saw increased COVID-19 themes. What impact do both of these facts have on federal business continuity?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question that we're seeing unprecedented increases in internet traffic. And we're pretty used to seeing sort of a 10, 12 terabit a second burst for an event, and then things quickly subside. But to give you an indication, the peak traffic we saw in Q1 of 2019 on our platform was around 70 terabits a second. Q1 of 2020, that is now closer to 170 terabits a second. And to put that into context, a terabyte is the physical equivalent of 1,300 filing cabinets, all filled with pieces of paper jam-packed. So just phenomenal levels of traffic. And I think the good news is overall, the internet at large has held up quite well. There have been some cases where gaming downloads have been throttled to make way for other types of traffic. But by and large, big internet traffic holding up well. I think we're seeing more fragility in corporate networks, remote access systems, and those type of systems. And to your point, certainly there has been an increase in phishing using lures related to COVID-19, something our researchers have seen as well as several others, the U.S. Secret Service, NSA, and other organizations at other government agencies.
So we see increased internet usage, we see an increase in attacks as well. Well, many federal agencies use virtual private networks, VPNs. Now, this is a concept established 20 years ago. We see many federal IT managers relying on VPNs for remote access. What about continuity in this VPN system we have now?
Yeah, John, to your point, I mean, the VPN has been sort of the workhorse over recent decades. It's sort of the predominant mode of extending remote access. In some ways, that is sort of perpetuating that perimeter security model where, access is synonymous with your position on the network topology. We do see, more recent evolutions around zero trust, where that notion of extending security at the network layer really is a level of risk that people are less and less comfortable with, just due to the fact that it provides such a repeatable avenue for attackers to kind of move laterally from initial point of compromise and make their way on that trusted network to crown jewels type of an application there. That's sort of part of it, John. And then also, I think we see, should that VPN be a hardware appliance, it does not have a great deal of elasticity. So if it's designed for X number of users and you exceed X number of users, we do see people that are in some capacity crunches.
If you talk to the people at the DoD, they talk about an attack surface. And that's what I see the increased internet usage here during the health crisis of a bigger attack surface. And that bigger attack surface means more potential for people to come with phishing attempts and move in and move laterally. And is this lateral move different, or has the denial of service attacks changed since this whole COVID crisis has started?
So the lateral movement, I think, is a repeatable element of almost every attack kill chain, whether it's Lockheed Martin or the MITRE attack framework. That is something that's so repeatably used by attackers that it's codified in the methodologies that are used there. So that hasn't changed. And I think that doesn't change until we move to more of a zero trust architecture. You highlighted DDoS. I think that is a primary risk that we've seen shift as more of the organization mission critical work is being done via remote access. The vulnerability of remote access systems then becomes that much more important. So I have had a fair number of conversations with security leaders who are rethinking the risk of, particularly a DDoS attack targeting remote access infrastructure and making sure that those are as resilient as they need to be to continue to support mission critical applications even in the face of increased traffic load and potentially a DDoS attack hitting somebody at their most vulnerable.
Speaking of zero trust, I think that 2020 here in February, NIST just issued the second draft of zero trust architecture. This document indicates perimeter-based security is insufficient. How is this connected to keeping federal systems online? Does this assist in keeping the doors open for federal websites?
Yes, so I think that, really that zero trust methodology was, first coined by analysts, the Forresters, the Gartners of the world. But if you look at the underlying philosophy there, much of that could be traced back to the United States Department of Defense and work at DISA. And it's mostly just common sense. And I think we ended up sort of in a perimeter security model due to shortcomings in technology a couple of decades ago, right? It was, not exactly consistent with things like least privilege, notions of authenticating before you connect. We ended up making some compromises there. But I think the good news is technology has advanced so much so that we can now move our security from the network layer up to the application layer, and really have security that is identity aware, that does not provide such excessive access that we've seen repeatedly leveraged by adversaries. So, in 2020, there are technologies that are readily available to grant access only with micro entitlements based on least privilege, based on your identity, where there's strong authentication before there's ever a connection. And I think, more fundamental information security 101 philosophy.
Great. I think if you talk to a systems engineer, they'd understand zero trust, but more importantly, they'd understand this concept of a very, very small network segment, kind of a miniature segment. Is that what they do? Just trying to miniaturize those segments as much as they can?
Yeah, that's one approach. And I think that's known as sort of micro segmentation. That carries with it still a good bit of complexity. And really where we see that targeted is what's known as east-west. So from one user to another. I think the technologies we see moving from user to application, there you see technologies like a software-defined perimeter or an identity-aware proxy. And in that model, you understand the identity of the user, you perform strong authentication, you understand the posture of their device, and really the syntax of the request, location of the request. And rather than just kind of in a VPN model, given John Gilroy access to our network, a fundamental level of access for 8 hours, sort of the probably the most orthogonal notion to zero trust that you can think of. Here, you're giving request by request access. So each request is mediated by a proxy, and then should everything meet policy, that request would be indirectly relayed to the compute where that data that we're protecting lives. And then you lock down with a micro perimeter that source of data and limit who has access to that in a direct sense, really only to those gateway security devices that are allowing that proxy request.
My guest today, Patrick Sullivan, Chief Technology Officer of Security Strategy at Akamai. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy, on the discussion, Mitigating Cyber Risks to Ensure Business Continuity, sponsored by Akamai on Federal News Network.